Good morning, Vascular Course. I've had a fair bit of correspondence through this week. Well done, everybody. You know, these things always work the same. But at the start, people are panicky and kind of don't know how to use the system. But then, bit by bit, stage by stage, it all starts to make sense. So, I'm glad to see. I'm glad to see everybody's logging on. That's the first thing. I'm just taking a little look here to see whether or not I've got any tests for you. Have I? Full grade centre. Let me just see. Um, oh, that's the wrong one. Never mind. I'll have a look. I'll have a little look later, and if there's anything to say, I'll add it on to the end of this. So yeah, excellent to see that you're all logging on and everything. And I've had a couple of correspondence from people, from mainly Pat and Michelle. Nice one. Nice one. Glad to hear from you both. The first thing to say is that I'm glad that you enjoyed, or you found rather stimulating, the the stuff that I put up there about cholesterol. It is interesting, isn't it? It is interesting. It's interesting when you hear people arguing who know a bit, and that Dr. Kendrick, he does put a good case, a thoughtful case forward. It's not just I don't reckon. There's a lot of large scale evidence gone on there, and what is undeniable is that in Southern Europe, for instance, where the heart disease, cardiovascular disease in general, is much lower than there is in the north, you could not, under any circumstances, say that their diet was less rich in saturated fats. You just couldn't, because you've all been to the south of France and you all know what they eat, and um, it ain't like fat light. It's duck and all that sort of stuff. Um, so yeah, I'm glad that you found that interesting. I've just spent half an hour there trying to find a paper that I saw last year about sodium, and that raised similar questions. That the incidence of cardiovascular deaths actually went up if a person had dropped their sodium levels too rapidly. I was taken aback by that too. Uh, Now, it's worthwhile pointing out that Dr. Kendrick is not arguing that statins don't work. In fact, he recognises that the trials demonstrate that they do work, but he just disagrees as to the mechanism by which they work. He says that this is due to an anti-inflammatory effect, that the inflammation that irritates the lining of the arteries um, somehow or other, the statin settles them down. And later on in his series, he goes on to give his own theory about why it is that populations get cardiovascular disease, but why people start dying of atheroma. And if anything, that sounds less likely than the cholesterol theory, to me anyway. To me, to me, the idea that it's stress strikes me as unconvincing. The French don't strike me as being a less stressed people than people in Scotland. You know, that's not my impression anyway. And anyway, how do you quantify stress? But I've already had one suggestion of an essay in from Pat. Well done, Pat. That's a good essay title, and nobody's ever done it before. I'd be very interested. And do I detect in your essay title a little bit of personal interest? You know, um, the other thing, is that Michelle tells me. Michelle, I got a little email off Michelle saying that all these emails and communications I get from you crowd always start with the same sentence. Maybe it's just me being rubbish with IT. And then when it turns out that, I found out what the problem is, you all strike me as being pretty savvy, at least for the IT so far as we need it here. But Michelle says that she's having trouble putting stuff on the discussion board. But it's going up all right, Michelle. So, what I'll tell you. Back to cholesterol. There's an interesting book I read not recently called The Rise and Fall of Modern Medicine by a fellow called James LeFanu. L-E, another word, F-A-N-U. This fellow writes for the Daily Telegraph, so he often strikes me as being sort of crusty Tory type, but he also gives you food for thought sometimes as well. And he's written a couple of articles. He's written a couple of chapters in this book on the question of statins. And if you wanted to sort of extend out into that controversial area, then, it might be worth your while taking a little look at his book. What he argues is that, in the 1950s, when people noticed that smoking caused serious public health problems, that this was something that wasn't like a disease in the sense of smallpox or cholera as a disease, but rather something that people were doing to themselves. He argues that in the 1950s it became fashionable for doctors to look for other things besides smoking that might have been in people's lifestyles that, might be damaging them. And diet was thought to be one of them. And fat in the diet was thought to be the causative agents to a range of health problems: peripheral vascular disease, heart disease, stroke. And maybe if we altered our lifestyle in the same way as packing and smoking, maybe if we altered our lifestyle and watch what we ate, then we could get down the amount of fat in our bloodstream, and therefore we'd get less peripheral vascular disease, cardiac disease, and stroke. Can you see how that argument works? But of course, what statins do is they give you a shortcut to all of that. That it's enormously difficult by dietary means to reduce the level of your circulating cholesterol. It's enormously difficult. Yeah. So what we've thought up is a quick way of doing the same thing, taking a tablet every day. Yeah. Well, that was never part of the lifestyle thing, was it? And if you can't reduce your serum cholesterol level by diet, perhaps you're not intended to. Perhaps your body likes it that way. And popping a pill to knock it down, he argues, is wrong-headed. I'm not arguing it. I take my statin every single day of the week. So, don't point the finger at me. I'm just saying what I've read. Okay, one last thing before I finish. And again, this is one of the things that Michelle had difficulty putting up on the discussion board. She asks a question about Doppler examination and the vein and breath holding. Why should it be, she asks, that your veins in your foot or in your peripheries should fill up because the person holds their breath? Why should that be? Well, one of the ways the blood gets back to your heart is through the act of respiration. Every time your diaphragm goes down and your chest wall goes out, you will suck air in, but you will also suck blood in from the lower part of your body by the bellows action of your diaphragm going up and down and your chest wall coming out. Blood will be lifted up into your thorax in that way. By taking in a deep breath and holding it, you're raising the intrathoracic pressure. You're holding blood out of your thorax, and therefore blood will find its own level in the blood vessels further downstream, in your abdomen and also in your legs. Presumably, that's an explanation of that phenomenon. Works for me. It works for me, all right. So, start thinking of your essays, start writing your essays, don't put it off. I can't emphasise this enough. The other thing is that somebody made a good suggestion about the Facebook group. All my Facebook groups, people have been saying to me, I'm putting the name of the module in, HEA so-and-so, but I can't find the actual course. So, what I've done on the announcement page there is I've stuck up the actual web address of the group. If you fancy joining us, fair enough. Otherwise, be like that. See you next week.